everyone. Welcome back to our education video series with Cortina Brass. I'm Dillon Parker. I'm one of the trumpet players, and I'm here with my friend Louis Ozoria, who also plays trumpet with the group, and we're going to be discussing our roles as trumpeters in brass quintet and what that generally means as far as our responsibilities to the group as a whole, rather than just us as a section. So one thing that's a bit of a learning curve for a lot of young players starting off as trumpeters in brass quintets is the aspect of cueing the music in, starting the pieces with just that, that little gesture. It requires a couple of things to start off. One is being able to recall the tempo of the piece you're about to play accurately, in your head, and sort of audiate it before you start, which is easier said than done when you might have adrenaline flowing, makes it feel like time's going slower, so you end up maybe playing faster than you meant to. Less often you might start too slow, but I would say the bigger concern is going to be starting too fast.
Yeah, I would definitely say one thing you touched on that's really important is the comfort of this. Typically, as younger players, we play under someone's direction, and there's a baton, and we're just, being guided or waiting for someone to give us the cue. This is something I personally had to really learn how to manage when I started playing in Cortina, because in jazz, we count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. But in the sense of quintet, you typically just use a gesture and start your piece. So kind of having an internal pulse is something I would definitely suggest, really hearing the music starting like 3 times before you actually start the piece. And one thing that I learned recently that a couple players mentioned to me was not even just the sense of waiting for the horn to move and the prep, but also the sense of the breath is really important, and taking a breath that everyone can anticipate breathing together and starting together. So as someone who had to take some time to get these things in place and figure out how they work and still work on them, those would be some of my suggestions that I think really improved my process of leading and learning how to cue different sections. I think another thing that we can definitely talk about is that's part of our rehearsal sometimes. There are sections where we have fermatas and things like that. There's a balance. I think, Dillon, you definitely come prepared sometimes and know exactly the way you want to get through something, but there are also times that we have to take a pause and say, like, okay, how does this work? And we have to think these things through.
One more small thing I might add to the cueing is one breakthrough I had that really helped is it's often good to just do a 1 beat prep and then go. But sometimes if you need it, you can do 2 preps. Like if it's in 3/4, you might go 2, 3, and then start, or 3, 4, whatever meter you're in. It's just a little trick that can help.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think the consistency of the group's chemistry also helps. When you play a piece enough, at least I experienced this in wind ensemble, when the conductor gives you that beat prep and you know where it's going to be because you've done it so many times, you've gotten used to that tempo. But also in contrast, you need to always be alert and ready because you never know what the group is feeling that day. Sometimes we are going to play a little faster. Sometimes we are going to play a little slower. And that goes back to what you were saying about how, when the emotions arise and different things in the actual performance setting, how do we play out? We need to be prepared for, anticipating those cues and things like that.
I guess this leads us to sort of the next aspect of leadership in brass, which is kind of sometimes leading the level of dynamics or changes in dynamics, and sort of. So, for example, there's a thing called the tablature system from the oboe world, where you sort of assign numbers to your dynamics, like this crescendo. Maybe you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you're arriving on the loudest. Having that gradual gradation and being able to actually control it and do it convincingly enough so that your fellow musicians can follow you and so that the audience can perceive it.
I think as a group, there's different points where we all kind of determine the dynamics and who determines the dynamic. But I think it's really important. I mean, the times that I've kind of had to take the lead on the melody and things like that and really stand out, you kind of take the decision of like, okay, is this beautiful and we're kind of existing in mezzo forte land, or is this like a Latin theme that we're really, up in the upper register and it has the characteristics that it's supposed to be kind of singing. You kind of take those cues, and most of the time nowadays in publishing and things like that, they tend to have good dynamic markings, but there's some times where you're reading something and you have to decide, oh well, I feel like this is where the dynamics are going to go. Dillon, did you want to talk about like how we work on these things individually as players?
Well, one thing that's important for all brass players, but particularly trumpet players, is practicing dynamic extremes and dynamic changes in your fundamental routine, spending time being able to actually hold a long tone in tune and crescendo and diminuendo, or hold it in tune at one dynamic that maybe challenges you. Maybe you have a hard time projecting the louder volumes, maybe you have a hard time controlling the softer volumes. Just making sure that that's addressed with all the other more obvious things like range, articulation, flexibility that are discussed a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can agree that like playing higher, we typically have a more successful time when we're playing louder as well. So being able to play at these higher dynamics, or sorry, at these higher ranges, but still using softer dynamics is something we do need to take into our personal practice so that when we show up to the group rehearsal, we're prepared. Another thing that I think is really important is considering the limits of the extremes. And I think some musicians sometimes put the restriction on themselves that they're playing up in the staff and that they need to be playing loud, but the section doesn't always call for it. So, doing justice to the music and really telling yourself, okay, I have these limitations naturally on the instrument, but can I work in my practice to kind of let them become, less restrictive, really. And in the lower register, we talk about that as well. Having a good sound, playing in tune, but really pumping out like a low G on trumpet. The flexibility of us between the brass quintet is we could be playing in the melodic side, but then suddenly we just become the background. Can we keep supplementing and providing to the music? It's not about the restrictions of the instrument we're playing. It's about what the music's calling for, and we need to consider that in our practice. So when things get a little wild, whenever we're playing as a group, there's always the chance of combustion suddenly, and we could lose each other at any minute between performances when things go off, or even in rehearsal. So as things go awry, and I think we can talk about musically in tempo, or we can be talking about the direction of the music. What is your go-to? Like as a first trumpet player, you hear something's kind of getting off. Where are you going?
So, there's in music, there's a lot of foreground and background, a lot like visual art. There's also a lot of structure and ornamentation, like in architecture. And to me, if you know that you have a foreground melody or you have a structural rhythm, something that's really integral to how the music holds itself together, you're just going to have to take leadership and make it very clear where you are so that others can catch up. On the other hand, if you have maybe a background figure or you're playing something that's ornamental to the overall rhythm, you might want to tune in to whoever's leading at that moment. So more commonly, I mean, that's as second trumpet, that's going to be how it is taking a minute to listen around you and then follow. And that could happen as well on the first part, but part of the territory of playing first trumpet is being ready to just take leadership when appropriate. And obviously, I don't want to encourage people to be overpowering or to default to taking charge all the time, but just being aware of when it is your responsibility and then having the wherewithal to do it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with all of that, especially, predominantly playing second trumpet. For me, it's just anything's going wrong, ears have to open. I need to lock on to whatever I can. And it kind of switches. Sometimes I am in the background and I'm just playing a supportive part, or sometimes I'm very lined up with the melody and I have to stay on that train. And then I would say, as a first trumpet player and as a second trumpet player, this really gets into the sense of confidence and how we're playing, and knowing that, like, you kind of wear your heart on your sleeve as a trumpet player. There's not a thing you're going to play that people don't really hear. um, I think it comes with a sense of humility as well, knowing that we typically play very melodic parts, and we want to be heard, but also acknowledging the fact that we're not supposed to just smear the paint on the canvas, and that's a balance that I think takes some maturity and some respect to music overall.
Sort of related to the idea of leading and following, there's a mixture of different timbres in the brass quintet, and there's times when someone might be blending with us or we might be blending with someone else. So when I was thinking about this concept, I definitely thought about, like, in our repertoire, we have an arrangement of Stephen Paulus's The Road Home that we play, and there's a moment where first trumpet and horn are in unison, and horn is the one with the primary melody up to that point. And so when I join, I try to really just be a part of the horn sound and not really stand out from it in any way, just almost like a harmonic extension of it, you know. And then on the other hand, there's moments like we play this arrangement of the Blue Danube Waltz by Johann Strauss, and there's a moment where I usually play second trumpet on that one, and I'm playing with Sam on trombone, and I can't really blend with a trombone or with a tuba just because the registers are so different. So whereas you can blend with a horn, our registers have some common ground, it's more like matching with low brass, that you are going to be a separate sound pretty much regardless, but you can try to match that timbre, so that it's like two, maybe Russian dolls or something, two similar things that are just different sizes, if that makes sense.
And that's actually one of my favorite things to listen to in a quintet. One of my favorite things, and I can't even point out a specific composition, but when you have first trumpet and tuba playing the same line, because you hear their individual instruments and the characteristics of them playing the same thing, but the difference of hearing it come out from the low end and then hearing this, like, super high ranged instrument, and them kind of existing on the same plane, but just walking two paths beside each other. It's really beautiful, and I guess that's something that you have to consider, that you'll never sound like a tuba, but you guys still need to match each other. And, musically, stylistically, all these things are very important. So I guess another thing we should talk about is the typical requirements we see in a lot of quintet music. I would say, as a trumpet player, it's very demanding. We play a lot more than I guess you would expect in most other music. And then the parts we typically carry tend to have more technical finesse, typically because they're more coinciding with a melody. It's the part that you're going to hear on top. So I would say, in your practice in general, it's really finding the balance of playing these parts that are flashier or sound more difficult, but making them seem, in a sense, subdued. Oh yeah, I'm just playing this little section. I didn't work on it for the last month and a half to make it sound this easy. But it's a characteristic that I think is really noticed when a trumpet player is playing the instrument and they're doing something that sounds so demanding, but they look so relaxed. It then comes out in their quality of sound. And I think it's important to take the time to practice that.
Yeah, and in addition to making sure all of the technical passages are polished and all the notes are taken care of and clean, also taking time to work on playing a simple melody that's exposed with a real sense of phrasing and grace, and being able to do it like a great singer, with a certain fullness and a consistency. And I mean, maybe this is kind of my personal thing, but I almost feel a little protected when something is technical. There's a lot going on, but it's a little intimidating sometimes to have an exposed melodic line where if you have any response problems, it's going to be very obvious. If you blank on like a long note versus blanking one note in a technical passage, right? So take time and look at your Roche book, look at vocalises, and still work on long tones, and make sure that you can play these whole notes and half notes just as impressively as you can do 16th notes and Alan Vizzuti type fireworks.
Definitely. I think that's a very serious thing that sometimes gets overlooked. The beauty and the simplicity. Now, another thing that I know we have to touch on, because we're the only ones that do it, is playing different trumpets, playing different instruments throughout one piece, throughout a whole performance. What ideas do you typically think about when it comes to this, Dillon?
You definitely want to know where your tuning slide should be set, because it's a little different to adjust your tuning on a piccolo versus a larger horn, or even E flat, C. I mean, they're all, and you might have different brands for each one. So definitely make sure that you don't pick up a cold horn and it's a quarter tone flat to the group. I mean, you know, it would be probably obvious, but sometimes you don't want to have to make that adjustment in the heat of the moment. You want to be prepared. And another thing is, probably the hardest aspect of it is being able to change your approach sufficiently. You know, you do definitely use a different sort of air on a B flat trumpet than you do on a B flat pick. And being able to be gentle on the piccolo while also being able to play with a full sound on a larger horn, you know, those are two physically different things. And if you can kind of stay in your body and resist the anxiety of the performance and just find that balance the best you can, that's going to carry you a long ways. And one more related thing is being ready for mute changes and understanding that you actually have to be ready to change your sound concept. You have to buzz the mute now. So, you know, getting that buzz on the mute is different than resonating a large horn, which again is in turn different than getting that light, gentle brilliance on the piccolo trumpet.
Yeah, that was great. I didn't really consider the fact that we also tend to have the most mute selection in a group. And while that comes with the same things, different brands, different timbres, different metals, you have to kind of know the characteristic you're looking for in all of them. I would also consider the freedom of instrument changes. I mean, some of the things that you're going to play, they're going to have the specific instrument implemented. So it will say this is for C trumpet, or we get to a specific section and it wants you to play pick. However, you also have the freedom that some pieces you decide you want to play C trumpet, some pieces you decide you want to play B flat trumpet. How do you go along deciding that? I think it mostly comes down to your style. So, you know, one thing we joke a lot about is the respect of, you know, playing classical and playing more commercial and really fitting the style. If we show up and we're planning to play all commercial music and like swing band arrangements and like Tower of Power, and Dillon shows up with his C trumpet, I might fire him. However, if Dillon comes in and brings a new Baroque arrangement and we're supposed to be playing a piccolo, I think he would fire me if I tried to sound like a lead trumpet player on a salsa gig, you know? So kind of knowing that musical responsibility and trying to understand what's the quality of the instrument that you're bringing for the music. I know sometimes we play church gigs, and if we're doing a bunch of hymns, if we're playing with strings, different things make Dillon choose that he's going to play C trumpet. For me, B flat trumpet is my home, and I always play B flat trumpet. So when I see Dillon with a C, I'm like, oh, okay, pull out the C trumpet. And it's always a good call, you know. I think we really consider the domain of the music we're playing and the tool for the job. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to our perspectives of being a trumpet player in the Cortina Brass Quintet. I'm Louis Ozoria, and that's Dillon Parker on the trumpet. We had a great time. Have a good one.